Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And of course, we've been telling you that we know that we have had a lot of questions coming from you regarding coronavirus and the vaccine. And we told you that we were going to try our best to see if we can have someone to speak with us about the coronavirus vaccine. Currently, the Ministry of Health, they have started the rolling out of the vaccination program, and so frontline workers were vaccinated this week or are being vaccinated this week, and it's going to continue into next week. A lot of questions we know that you would like to have answered, and we have a very, very well-versed individual with us this afternoon in the person of Dr. Oles, and he's the president of the St. George's University. He's a virologist, and I will give him that opportunity to explain and to give us a little insight on who he is and a little background in the work that he's been doing. Good day to you, sir, and welcome to our program.
Well, thank you. As you said, for the last 6 years, I've been the president of St. George's University. And I'm actually a tropical infectious disease specialist. And so basically I'm a specialist not just in infectious diseases, but particularly those that develop around the world. So not just those restricted to the United States. Probably more interesting to this audience is that for years I was the person in the medical school that has given the lectures on tropical viruses that are able to make the species jump from animals to humans. And students often said, you know, this is really fascinating, but it's not really very relevant to the practice of medicine. They're not saying that anymore, because as you may know, coronavirus, this particular COVID-19, is in fact an animal virus that has made the successful jump to humans. And that's, of course, what originated this particular pandemic. So, obviously, this is what I'm expert in, but I've also tried hard to try to educate all of the people in the university about COVID-19 really since the last year. And I do updates to the university periodically about a variety of COVID topics, and I'm more than happy to talk to you specifically about the vaccine. And I suppose the other new topic for most people is the impact of these variants that have arisen in many countries of the world.
Well, right, and so I'm happy that it's going to be a very diverse topic surrounding the coronavirus and the vaccine and the variants, as you've said. Now, let's start from the beginning. Have you yourself been vaccinated?
Well, I've gotten the first vaccine, and I get my second vaccine on the 17th of March. So I'm about halfway through that process, but I'm clearly, I had to wait until my turn, and my age group just came up about 2 weeks ago, and I got my appointment the very next day and got my first vaccine, and I'm actually getting the Moderna vaccine, which has a 4-week interval, and I'll get the second one in about 2 more weeks.
How did you feel when you took that vaccine? Were there any side effects or so?
Well, I felt a little tired. I guess my arm might have been a little sore, but I wouldn't say I had any particularly remarkable reaction to it. But we'll talk more about that because minor side effects are pretty common with this vaccine. And this is a somewhat different vaccine than the one you're going to be using in Grenada. So if we're going to talk about the vaccine, let me start by saying you really can't use the word COVID-19 vaccine to sort of mean a single thing. Because in fact, there are 7 COVID-19 vaccines that are available on the world market, and they all differ a little, although they have a lot of similarities. And so the vaccine that's currently being used in Grenada is the AstraZeneca vaccine that was developed principally through a partnership in England. And it's the vaccine that has been used almost universally in England. And not surprising, that's the vaccine that's coming first to Grenada, since you're a former British colony. And in the United States, we're using these 2 messenger RNA vaccines, which is a different technology, but all of the vaccines induce a significant amount of immunity. And fortunately, all of the vaccines are actually quite safe, and we'll need to talk about those. But the specific vaccine you're going to get in Grenada is the AstraZeneca vaccine.
And how does its Zeneca differ? What's so special about it?
Well, of the vaccines, there are several different ways that you can, if you will, immunize or develop resistance. The messenger RNA vaccines that we're using in the United States do an interesting thing. It's a new type of vaccine. The genetic information that controls everything in your body is encoded in the genes in the nucleus of the cells in your body. And those are in things called DNA. That's really the, if you will, the molecular code for human beings. And they have to be translated, if you will, into proteins. And they are done so by sending a message out of the nucleus of the cell based on that DNA, and they go to another part of the cell that builds proteins. And that molecule that transfers that message is called a messenger RNA. And the two vaccines that are currently used in the United States basically insert viral messenger RNA, which is a molecule that basically gets your cells to produce that molecule by thinking it was encoded in their nucleus. And they produce a molecule that is produced by the virus, which is called a spike protein. And immunity toward the spike protein is the common thread of all of the vaccines. Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine is a somewhat different strategy. It uses a carrier virus. That is a virus that doesn't cause illness in human beings. In the case of AstraZeneca, it's a chimpanzee adenovirus. It doesn't cause disease in human beings. And inserted into that chimpanzee adenovirus is the code for this spike protein. And so when you get a shot in the AstraZeneca vaccine, the coronavirus spike protein molecules are produced by your own cells in a similar way to what I just described with the messenger RNA vaccines. Now, there's a couple other vaccines out there that you may at some point run across. The Russians have a vaccine called Sputnik. That actually uses a very similar technology, except in this case it's not a chimpanzee virus, it's a human adenovirus. That's also true for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's the vaccine that I think will be released in a couple days in the United States. That has the advantage of being a single dose vaccine, but it also uses a human adenovirus as the carrier. And then there's the Chinese vaccine. The Chinese vaccine uses an older technology, which is sort of killed virus that is used in the shot, and your body develops immunity against what is basically a dead virus. It's, if you will, similar to, if you will, what flu shots are based on, which is dead influenza virus that is used in those vaccines. So for the purpose of Grenada, the one that people are getting right now, and probably the vaccine that you're going to get in the next couple months, is the AstraZeneca vaccine. And so when we talk about that vaccine, I'll probably refer principally to the studies that are done in England, because England has done the vast majority of the studies with that particular vaccine.
Okay, and as it relates to the efficacy of that vaccine and how effective it is on humans versus others, where do you rank the AstraZeneca?
Well, let's step back and make sure that we understand what we're trying to do with the vaccine. The most important reason to get the vaccine is that vaccinated people don't get hospitalized and they don't die. So that's the most important thing. Remember, 500,000 people have already died in the United States. Excuse me. And, millions of people have already died around the world. And so the most important reason to get everybody vaccinated is to make sure that nobody dies of COVID-19. All of the vaccines, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, the Chinese vaccine, Sputnik, they all are very effective, virtually 100% protective against people getting hospitalized and dying. And that's true with the AstraZeneca vaccine. There was virtually no one in the blinded trial that was hospitalized and died that got the vaccine. Now, in addition to keeping you from being hospitalized and dying, you'd want the vaccine to keep you from getting sick in any way. And it turns out that the AstraZeneca vaccine is pretty good at doing that. It reduces the likelihood that you'll be sick in any way by about 70%, which is pretty good. It's actually probably as good as a lot of the other vaccines we use. And those people that get sick usually have mild disease. Now, that's not quite as effective as the two messenger RNA vaccines that are 95% protective against not getting sick, but they are still quite effective, and they are also effective against the new variants which are popping up, which are mutations in the virus. And then the last issue of why you want to get immunized is that you'd also like to not get infected. You want to be protected against being infected by the virus at all, whether you get sick or not. And in this case, the AstraZeneca vaccine has been tested for that, in contrast to virtually any of the other vaccines. And we know that the AstraZeneca vaccine reduces the likelihood that you can be infected, meaning that you could then transmit the disease, by about 70%. So the AstraZeneca vaccine keeps you from getting infected in the first place, not completely, but a pretty good reduction, about 70% reduction. It keeps you from sick, meaning that you feel bad in any way, and that reduction is in the 70s. And most importantly, that vaccine prevents you from being hospitalized should you get infected, and certainly not dying if you should get infected. So pretty darn effective vaccine.
And just to clarify the ending part of that with regards to whether or not you'll be able to, because you're saying there's a likelihood that after taking the vaccine that you'll be able to still contract the virus, whether there's a 30% or 35 or 40%, but it still exists. But what about if you have contracted that? What about if you have contracted the virus? Are you going to be able to spread it to somebody else?
Yes, that's one of the reasons why, until everyone on the island of Grenada gets vaccinated, people are still going to have to wear masks and socially distance even after they get the vaccine. Now that may seem counterproductive. You know, people say, well, once I get the vaccine, life will go back to normal. Once you get the vaccine, you personally are protected from dying from the virus, but you could still contract the virus and you could still transmit the virus. So there will be a period of time while we try to get everyone on the island vaccinated when everyone will have to continue to wear masks and socially distance despite the fact that many Grenadians will be vaccinated.
All right. Now, many vaccines may have taken a long time to develop. In the case of the AstraZeneca, some may argue that it was relatively short of a time that the scientists and everybody had to put this together. And for that reason, may be skeptical of taking the vaccine for fear of the unknown, maybe down the road, 10 months or a year later, them becoming ill. And very ill, might I add, what are the likelihood of that happening?
It is true that these vaccines were developed very quickly, but let us start with the fact that we didn't start from time zero. Yes, the COVID-19 virus is new. We didn't know about it until a little over a year ago. But interestingly, in our efforts to combat the Ebola outbreak that took place, 3 or 4 years ago, and before that, the outbreak of a disease called MERS, which is a disease that was a problem in the Middle East that is another virus, and way back in the early 2000s, in our attempts to deal with SARS, which was a disease, another coronavirus that caused human epidemic, we, in our efforts to respond to those earlier viral infections, all of which came from bats, by the way, eventually to humans, we learned an awful lot about what type of vaccines would work and what vaccines would work. And so when the coronavirus, COVID-19, became a problem, we had already done an awful lot of research into other related viruses, and there had already been attempts to develop, for instance, vaccines against SARS, vaccines against MERS, vaccines against Ebola. And so the jump to new vaccine with COVID-19 was a lot shorter than it would have been if we'd never seen a problem, never seen a coronavirus before. Now, having said that, it's still a very short period of time, but I hear this all the time. It is so new, how do we know that it's safe? Well, the truth is you can never say it's completely safe. I mean, I would be insincere to say that. Now, having said that, in around the world, they double-blinded studies. These are studies for which one group of people got the vaccine and one group of people got sugar water. Neither the doctors nor the patients had any idea which group they were in. And in those studies, well over 100,000 people received one of these various vaccines. And that's an awful lot of people to be followed very closely, not only to see how well the vaccines work, but also to see what the side effects were. So let's first talk about the long-term side effects that take place, let's say, months after you get the immunization. In all of those studies, the people that received the vaccine had no greater problems than those that received the sugar water. So, in a follow-up of about a year, there was no evidence of any long-term complications from these vaccines. Now, that's a very safe vaccine from a long-term standpoint. In fact, probably a lot safer than some of the vaccines that we take routinely. Those are really, really safe vaccines. Now, the other thing that they looked at is what are the short-term complications, i.e. complications placed in the first days to weeks. And there, those people that received the actual vaccine had a higher percentage of having short-term reactions to the vaccine compared to those that got sugar water in their arms. But fortunately, all of those short-term reactions were very short-lived. So yes, some people get a sore arm, some people develop a low-grade fever, some people feel crummy, but the good news is it generally lasts only about a day. Now, so that would make it very safe even in the short run, even though you're likely to get a little sick in the beginning. And in fact, those short-term side effects are more common with the second shot than with the first shot. And it's probably a sign that your body's immune system is ramping up to protect you. And that's why the incidence of getting sick, is more common in the second shot. Now, the one complication that is more concerning is an allergic reaction to the vaccine that's anaphylaxis, which is that's a serious thing to have happen. But the good news is if it happens, one, it's very, very rare. Right now they figure about 2 to 4 people per million get this reaction. So that's really rare. And the other good news is it happens immediately. And so that's why people who get vaccinated are asked to stay in the doctor's office or the hospital where they're getting the vaccine for about 15 minutes because it's easily treated. Even though it's a potentially serious reaction, they can give you a shot of epinephrine with a so-called EpiPen, and it solves that problem immediately. So although it's something to be aware of, none of the short-term side effects should keep you from getting the vaccine. When people are worried about vaccines, people in Grenada have been very lucky because you really haven't had any COVID on the island. So people are probably walking around saying, hey, what's the big deal? I don't know anybody that's, died of COVID, etc. You're lucky. You should be living in the United States this year. But as a result of that, people, say, well, I don't want to get sick at all. But you have to remember that the disease that you're being protected against is a very serious disease. People of all ages can die from COVID-19. Even young people can die of COVID-19. And even people that get sick but don't die, some of them can have symptoms that can last for over a year. And so this is a very serious health problem that you don't want to get, and here's a vaccine that is very effective in protecting you. So there's no question that it's a lot better to get the vaccine than to take the risk of getting COVID-19. And this is going to be particularly important over the next, several months to a year, because Grenada has been very effective in keeping the virus off the island. People start returning, tourists return, when people start coming back, when our own students start coming back, there's going to be a risk that there's going to be some transmission on the island. And if you're unvaccinated, that virus will find a way to get to you. And I wouldn't want that to happen to anyone because obviously we don't want anyone to get very sick and certainly nobody to die. But we don't even want people to have a mild illness but then have persistent problems like cough and confusion and other things that might last for as long as a year. So there's a lot of reasons to get the vaccine.
And on the,
Yeah?
okay, sorry for cutting you. And in terms of, I just wanted you to elaborate on the longer term effects. Is it unlikely that somebody gets seriously ill, say 5 years down the road after taking a vaccine?
That, it's not been 5 years, so I don't have any data to support that. But given how the vaccines work, it's extremely unlikely to cause long-term side effects. Let me just point out that the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the one you're talking about, that virus is unable to multiply in the human host. So, it's not going to last in your body very long. So most of the reactions, if you're going to have any at all, are all going to happen pretty quickly, and then they're going to be gone. The messenger RNA vaccines that we're using in the United States, those messages only last for a few days. So it's not impossible, but I would say it's highly unlikely that anyone's going to have a long-term complication 4, 5, 6 years from now as a result of these vaccines. Now, having said that, unfortunately, the disease COVID-19 might very well have long-lasting complications. We don't know yet, but some of these symptoms that persist for over a year might persist for longer than that, meaning 4 years. So people that are worried about some complication 4 or 5 years from now should be worried about getting COVID-19, not about getting the vaccine.
All right. And when I said 4 or 5 years, I meant other vaccines, not necessarily those that were developed for the COVID-19. Now, here's another question. So let's say someone takes AstraZeneca because that's what's available now. And then like we are hearing about the Johnson & Johnson, it's proven to be very effective, XYZ. And they decide, you know what, I want that shot. Can people take two different sorts of vaccines for the same virus?
Well, those are studies that are taking place right now, but I would say that in all likelihood, the answer to that is yes. There's already a study at using one of the viruses for the first shot and a different vaccine for the second shot. We don't know that data yet, but my advice to people, because I've heard this a lot in the United States, where there are 2 or 3 different vaccines available, people say, well, I don't want to take this vaccine, I want to take another vaccine. My advice is, this is a race. This is a race between whether we can get everyone vaccinated against this virus versus the virus mutating or changing to cause even more serious disease. And my advice is all of these vaccines, including the Russian and the Chinese vaccines, are all very safe and are highly effective. So my advice is take whatever vaccine you can get now, and in the future, if it turns out that we need more immunity, you can undoubtedly take a different vaccine in the future, and it'll only further boost your protection.
Also, once you take the vaccine, does it provide protection for forever, or you may have to take a booster shot after you would have had your first 2 initial shots, the AstraZeneca?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say, will it last forever? Because we just don't know. So obviously the longest that we are able to, if you will, measure protection is about a year, because that's about as long as it's been out there. And clearly the vaccines will protect for a year. Even natural infection probably protects people for a period of time. We're not exactly sure how long, but probably at least 6 months or so. Now, I would guess that vaccination will protect longer than a year, but I have no idea whether it's going to protect forever. If I were guessing, and this is entirely an educated guess, I would say the answer to that is probably no. I think that eventually vaccination against COVID-19 will wane, and we will probably sometime in the future probably have to have further booster shots. Now, having said that, that's why we also have to talk about the variants. This is a virus that unfortunately often mutates. So as a result of this, this is a virus that changes slowly over time, and it changes even faster if lots of people get infected. And so the fact that we're in a pandemic means that the number of times that this virus is multiplying is through the roof. It's very, very high. And as a result of that very high replication that's taking place because so many people have the infection, the selection of viruses that are more infectious and cause more severe disease and ultimately may in fact be more difficult to treat is going on. So if I had to guess, I would guess that we're all going to hopefully get immunized now, and hopefully we can get on top of this pandemic so that this is no longer one of the major killers of the world. And then in the future, we may need booster shots, but those booster shots may in fact be manipulated to deal not only the coronavirus that we have now, but any new variations that may develop over time. In a sense, this is exactly what happens with the flu shots. Remember that the flu shot that you get is different every year. We have a slightly different formulation for that flu shot. Gets created differently every single year to keep people from getting flu. Now, I don't think it'll get that bad where we're talking about yearly COVID-19 vaccines, but if I were guessing, I would say sometime in the future, people that have been immunized now will probably get a booster shot. And when we get that booster shot, it's likely to be a shot that's not exactly like the one that we're getting today.
Okay. What about people with pre-existing health conditions or so? Should they be concerned when it comes to taking the shot, COVID-19? Well, the AstraZeneca in particular, for Grenada in particular.
That's a very broad question. So let me just say, when you say pre-existing conditions, meaning like heart disease and diabetes and those sorts of things,
That's correct.
those people should get the vaccine, absolutely. They're at much greater risk of hospitalization and dying. So there's absolutely no question that those people should get the vaccine. Now, if what you mean by other medical conditions, people that are undergoing chemotherapy, people that are undergoing radiation treatment, people that have infections with HIV/AIDS, people that are on high-dose steroids, those are all immunosuppressive type activities. Those are situations where you should talk to your doctor. But even in those situations, some of those people are still going to get vaccinated because, again, they're at high risk as a result of those diseases of dying of COVID-19. So all of those typical co-infections, comorbid conditions, et cetera, you talked about, if anything, it's more important that they get vaccinated early because they're at higher risk of dying. If it's an immunosuppressive issue, I think you should talk to your doctor specifically about your, but even then, many of those people will still get vaccinated.
And what about people who believe that they might be pregnant women or people who wants to get pregnant pretty soon? Should they take the vaccine?
There's a study right now that's going on to prove that the vaccine is safe in pregnancy. Now, having said that, even in that setting, many obstetricians have recommended that pregnant women get the vaccine because not only does the vaccine protect the pregnant mother, but since we believe neutralizing antibody is the mechanism by which people that are vaccinated are protected from COVID-19, it turns out that when you vaccinate a pregnant woman, the antibodies pass over to the baby through the placenta, and they're protected for the first 6 months of life through the antibodies that are produced by the mother. So I would say in the setting of a pregnancy, talk to your obstetrician. But I've been asked this question many times, and I've talked to many obstetricians about it, and many obstetricians recommend pregnant women get the vaccine now. But I would say it's most important that, that we complete a study to prove to everyone's satisfaction that it's safe. And those studies are taking place right now, and I think we'll know in a couple months absolutely whether it's safe. But you can see that it's a dilemma even now.
Okay, Dr. Oles, I see that we are running out of time. I would like to give you the opportunity now if there's anything regarding this subject that you wanted us to discuss that we haven't, well, I'll give you the opportunity to do so now.
Well, I hope I've convinced people that they really should get the vaccine as soon as they can. And that really goes for anyone, especially older people, people with pre-existing conditions and other things that put them at risk for hospitalization and dying. But there's also an important public health reason to do this. If we cannot get the majority of people on the island of Grenada to get vaccinated, then the virus can basically spread around the island, and those people that got vaccinated won't know that the virus is spreading around. And what it'll do is it's going to find those small number of people who didn't get vaccinated, and they can get quite sick and they could potentially die. So it's not only the right thing to do for yourself, but it's the right thing to do for the country of Grenada. And finally, these variants are, fortunately right now, are not interfering with the protection induced by the vaccine. But if we allow millions of people around the world to continue to get COVID and transmit this virus, that virus will eventually mutate into a much worse form that we'll have to deal with down the line. So not only is it important for you personally, it's important for the country of Grenada, but quite frankly, it's important for the world that we try to get as many people vaccinated as fast as we can.
And just one question before you go. There seemed to be an aggressive campaign to promote vaccination, and that has caused some skepticisms. Do you believe that the right thing to do is to push the whole vaccination process, or and just allow people to go ahead and get vaccinated? Okay, let me just take that back. No. Point blank, people are suspicious of the campaign that is going on to have as many people vaccinated as possible. My question to you is, what is your response to that?
Well, I think it's as I just described. You know, you're dealing with a disease that kills people. And in a sense, the island of Grenada is a victim of your own success. You know, your country has managed to keep COVID out of your country. There haven't been a whole lot of deaths on the island. If you doubt that this is a huge risk, you just have to look down in Trinidad, or look over in Barbados, or look over to the United States and look what a mess we've got. Now, you have the opportunity on the island of Grenada to basically never have to deal with widespread hospitalizations and deaths. But it's going to require getting everybody vaccinated. So I'm not surprised that there's a big push to try to get everybody vaccinated. Now, you know, I understand that people are suspicious and they, you know, I don't want to get politics involved in this. That's one of the reasons that I'm glad that I have an opportunity to speak to Grenadians. You know, I have no vested interest besides I want all the Grenadians to do well, to not get COVID, to not die. And the only way that that's going to happen is to get the vast majority of people on the island vaccinated. Now, if no one on the island decides to take any vaccines, that virus is going to end up getting to the island at some point, and it'll spread like wildfire. And we've seen that in the United States. Please don't make the same mistakes that were made in the United States with people sort of not believing in masks and social spacing until all of their neighbors were getting sick and some of them were dying. The same thing's true with the vaccine. You know, you have the advantage. There's already been tens of millions of people that have gotten this vaccine, and they're all doing pretty well. These are highly effective and very safe vaccines. I hope I can convince you that it's in your personal advantage, it's to your country's advantage, and quite frankly, it's to mankind's advantage to get as many people vaccinated as we can, as quickly as we can.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olds. It's been a pleasure. We know that you have a really tight schedule, and we are happy that we were able to steal you for a moment so that you can share your knowledge with us and give us a better understanding. I think that's what we need, information, so that we can make informed decision when it comes to being vaccinated.
Well, I look forward to returning to Grenada, which I will only do after I'm fully vaccinated.
Okay, fair enough. So thanks again and be safe.
Bye to everyone.
All right, folks, and we've been talking to Dr. Oles, and he's the president of the St. George's University. And of course, we wanted to give you that opportunity to hear from someone who knows about this, so that you can make an informed decision as it relates to being vaccinated. We thank you for your attention. Now, feel free to share the program so that other people, your friends and your family, can get to listen to this discussion. All right, so go ahead and share, and we say thank you again, and we'll see you later. Have a good one.
The various COVID-19 vaccines work differently, but all do the same thing. They stop COVID-19 from making you sick. When someone usually gets sick from a virus, that virus has been able to get into the body's cells and force them to make more of the virus. And until a body has had enough time to make antibodies to fight the virus, that person will stay sick. But when you get a COVID-19 vaccine, it tells your cells to pretend to look like COVID-19 cells. And because your body's defenses think those are COVID-19 cells, even though they aren't, your defenses start preparing antibodies to fight the virus, even though you don't have the virus, and your body won't attack your cells that look like COVID-19. Now with your body prepared, if the real COVID-19 virus comes along, your body is ready to stop it right away, so you won't get sick. All because the vaccine prepared your body. So, get your vaccine when it becomes available, so your body is protected.